Miss Amy's been busy with her homework and hasn't had much time to read, so I am so excited that I get to read chapter 9 of The Return of the Indian by Lynn Reed Banks to you tonight. Now remember, boys and girls, Miss Amy does not own the rights to this book. She just owns the book, and she's glad she gets to read it to you. In our last chapter, which was a few weeks ago, actually it wasn't a few weeks, maybe a week or two ago, Omri and Patrick and the matron were, and Bright Stars were working on saving Little Bear. And when we left the chapter, it sounded like there was some hope. So let's go ahead and read chapter 9, a good luck piece, and see what happens next. Little Bear's recovery was little short of miraculous. The operation was a complete success. By the next day, he was sitting up demanding food and other services, not particularly grateful for his deliverance, and in general, very much himself as Omri remembered him. He was unable to hide his delight at seeing Omri again. He tried to conceal his feelings behind a mask of dignity, but through his wooden expression, his black eyes gleamed and a grin kept twitching at his stern mouth. "Omri grow much," he remarked between slurps of a mug of hot instant soup. There was a distinct shortage of toothpaste tops throughout the house, which Omri's mother was to remark on. "But still only boy, not chief like Little Bear." "Are you a real chief now?" Omri asked. He was sitting on the floor beside the chest, gazing in rapture at his little Indian restored to him and almost to health. Little Bear nodded impressively. "Father die. Little Bear chief of tribe." Omri glanced at Bright Stars. How much had she told him of the tragedy which had overtaken their village? She seemed to understand his thought and signaled him quickly behind Little Bear's back. Omri nodded. Much better not to say too much until Little Bear was stronger. He hadn't asked any questions yet. Patrick had stayed for breakfast and then reluctantly phoned his mother. He came back up to Omri's room looking bleak. "She says I've got to come back," he said. "We're leaving today. I asked if I could stay and come back later, but she said I have to leave here in an hour." Omri didn't say anything. He didn't see how Patrick could bear to leave. To make matters worse, Omri's parents had particularly asked if he could stay over another night. They were going to a party that evening and would be home late. Adil and Gillen would be out too. There'd be a babysitter, of course, but she was a stodgy old lady, and Patrick would be company for Omri. Omri thought Patrick's mother was being entirely unreasonable and said so. Patrick was inclined to agree. Meanwhile, they had this hour. They decided to spend it talking and doing things for the Indians. The first thing Little Bear asked for was his old long house, built by himself when he'd been with Omri last year. Fortunately, Omri still had it, or what was left of it. It had been made on a seed tray packed with earth, but this had dried out in the interval, so that several of the upright posts had come adrift, and some of the bark tiles, so carefully shaped by Little Bear and hung on crosspieces, had shriveled and dropped off. When Little Bear saw his derelict masterwork, sometimes words are even hard for Miss Amy, he had to be forcibly restrained from leaping out of the bed immediately to repair. How Omri let fall down! Why Omri not mend? He shouted wrathfully. Omri knew better than to argue. I couldn't do it like you can, he said. My fingers are too big. Too big, agreed Little Bear darkly. He stared at the long house from his bed. Omri had spent the early hours before anyone was awake making him a better bed from 2 matchboxes, giving him a headboard to sit up against. His mind was roving in all directions, thinking of ways to make Little Bear and Bright Stars more comfortable. He still had the old teepee. As soon as the Indian was a bit better, he would probably prefer to use that for privacy. Omri had fixed a ramp leading onto the seed tray, and Bright Stars had begun to go up and down it, carrying bedding into the teepee, like a little bird making its nest. A fat little bird. Miss Amy doesn't like that word. Omri wondered, watching her stagger to and fro, how long it would be before her baby came. He was busy giving her a water supply. It was a sort of pond. The container was the lid of a coffee jar, sunk into the earth of the seed tray near the teepee. He was now making a proper bucket out of one of the toothpaste caps by piercing 2 holes in the sides with a needle heated red hot in the flame of an old candle he'd found and threaded in a handle made from a bit of one of his mother's fine hairpins. He's so creative. That would make it easier to carry, of course. That was just the beginning of all the things that would be needed if they stayed long. Bright Stars vanished into the teepee, and Little Bear, who had been watching her too, beckoned Omri closer. Soon I father, he said proudly, and hit himself on the chest. A flash of pain crossed his face. Yes, said Omri, so you'd better rest up and get well. I well. He shifted restlessly about on the matchbox bed. Suddenly he said, Where other brother? What do you mean? My brothers? No. Little Bear brother. Blood brother like Omri. It occurred to Omri and Patrick at the same moment who he meant. Patrick had also been busy. He had gone outside earlier and dug up a very small turf of grass from the garden, a piece of living lawn about 6 inches square, a paddock for the pony to graze on. It was to have a fence around it, which Patrick was making out of twigs, string, and glue. Now he looked up from this with an unreadable look on his face. When your mom threw your models away, began Omri slowly. Yeah? Did she get rid of all of them? As far as I know. You really are the pit, said Omri between his teeth. Me? Why? I suppose you just threw him in with the others and let him for or I suppose you just threw him in with the others and left him with your mum to chuck in the dustbin. The dustbin. I was going to say dumpster. What are you talking about? You know darn well. Boone! Patrick dropped his eyes. Omri couldn't tell what he felt. He seemed almost to be smiling, but Omri felt suddenly so furious with him that this only made him angrier. Though they had spoken quietly, Little Bear's sharp ears had caught the gist. Why throw Boone? I want see blood brother. Who throw? I kill, he roared. Bright Stars emerged from the teepee at the first roar and darted to his side. She forced him to lie on his back and pinioned him to the bed by main force until he calmed down a little and evidently promised her to behave. Then she hurried to the edge of the chest with a gleam in her eyes. That boded not good at all. "Where Little Bear brother?" she demanded. "Little Bear want." "No good. Him get angry." "Omri bring Boone now." Omri's inside seemed to be churning up with an anger no less strong than the Indians. He turned on Patrick. "You must have been mad to let your mother throw him away, just because for some idiotic reason you wanted to pretend none of it ever happened. I'm going to kick your head in, you dim Wally!" And he made a move towards Patrick. Patrick didn't step back. He stood with his hands in his pocket. "He's here," he said. Omri stopped short, jolted as if he stepped up a non-existent step. "What?" "He's here, in my pocket." Slowly, he withdrew his hand and opened it. Lying in the palm was the crying cowboy on his white horse. Boone, as large as life, or rather as small. Omri uttered a shout of joy. "You've got him! You had him all the time?" Then his grin faded. "Are you mad? Why didn't you say so in the first place?" "Not exactly proud of the fact that I still carry him everywhere," Patrick said. "So you hadn't stopped believing." "I don't know. I wanted to. I tried to tell my brother about it once, and he teased me for a solid week, saying I was a nutcase telling everyone I believed in fairies. It really got me. Of course, I couldn't prove a thing, not even to myself, so I decided it never happened. But I just kept Boone in my pocket all the time, like, well, sort of for good luck." Omri had picked up the figure of Boone tenderly and was examining it. The horse's legs had become a bit bent, and Boone's beloved hat was looking undecidedly the worse for wear, but it was still unmistakably, even in plastic, Boone. It was the way they had last seen him, sitting on his horse in his 10-gallon hat, his hand holding a big red bandana to his nose, blowing a trumpet blast of farewell. "I can't stand saying goodbye. I just refused to say it. That's all. I'll only bust out crying if I do." "Come on, Boone," whispered Omri, and he put him without more ado into the cupboard and turned the key. He and Patrick bent over eagerly, bumping heads. Neither of them brought to the surface of his mind the deep fear they shared. Boone, too, had lived in dangerous times. Omri knew now that time worked the same at both ends, so to speak. A year had passed for him, and in another place and time, a year had passed for his little men, and an awful lot, and a lot of it awful, could happen in a year. But almost at once their fears were laid to rest. There was a split-second silence, and then, on the other side of the cupboard door, Boone began battering and kicking it, and a faint stream of swear words issued through the metal. "I ain't putting up with it. No, sir. It ain't fair. It ain't doggone well right. I ain't been drinking. I ain't been fighting. I ain't cheated at poker in over a week. Ain't no law can sling a man in jail when he's innocent as a no-born babe. Never mind keeping him shut in a cell so dark he can't see his own mustache." The boys were too fascinated to do anything at first, even open the door. They just crouched there, grinning imbecilically at each other. "It's Boone! It's really him!" breathed Patrick. But Boone, all unaware, and getting no response to his yells and blows, now decided no one was listening, and his voice began to quaver. "They done up and left me," he muttered. "Gone plumb away and left old Boone alone in the dark." There was a pause, followed by a long-nosed blow and shook the cover. "'Tain't funny," he went on, his voice now definitely shaking with sob. "Don't they know a man can be brave as a lion and still scared of the dark? Ain't they got no imagination, leaving a fellow to rot in a pitch black hole?" It says something else, but Miss Amy didn't say it. His voice rose in a shrill tide of tearful complaint. Miss Amy's getting a little twangy. I guess that's all right, because I am a resident of Texas. Omri could not bear it a second longer. He opened the door. The light struck through, and Boone instantly looked up, his red bandana dropping to the floor between his knees. He jumped to his feet, staring his mouth agape, his battered old hat askew on his ginger head. That means he was redheaded, if in case you forgot. The horse backed off and snorted. "Well, I'll be eternally hornswoggled," Boone got out at last, "if it ain't you all." And that, boys and girls, ends chapter 9 of Lynn Reed Banks, The Return of the Indian. It's getting excited. All our friends are back. And Bright Stars is expecting a baby. I cannot wait to see what happens. I imagine there's about to be an argument between Omri and Patrick about where Boone's going to stay. What do you think? I guess you'll have to stay tuned and wait for chapter 10 with Miss Amy. If you're watching this before bedtime, good night and sleep tight.